Fourth grade, and welcome to Module 3, the structures and functions of living things. Our first lesson is going to be about structures and functions of plants. So let's watch our short video and then jump right in.
Do you know what this is? Yes, it's an X-ray. In fact, it's an X-ray of an iguana. I want to be a veterinarian when I grow up. Then I will use technology like this to care for sick and injured animals. I want to work in a zoo. That way I can help all kinds of animals, even my favorite animal, penguins.
All right, let's go ahead and jump into our first pages. So you're going to take a look at page 106. Now, it says plants are made up of different parts that help the plant live in its environment. Put an X on all of the boxes that contain a part that could be found on a plant. So put little X's in any of these boxes that are plant parts, and then explain your thinking down at the bottom. Once you've completed that, we're going to go ahead and take a look at our next page. It says, look at the photo of the plant. What questions do you have? Let's go ahead and take a look at the picture of our plant over here. And stop and look at it for a moment. Think of all of the questions you have. Write down at least 3 questions about the plant, maybe why it looks a certain way, why it's tilted a certain way, any questions that you can come up with. Once you've completed that, your next section is going to be to read about a botanist. And we have a photo right here of a botanist. It's someone who studies plants. After you've read the section about the botanist, you're going to go ahead and answer your questions on the following page. Number 1 says, using clues from the botanist's journal entry, what do you think a botanist does? What clues do you see? So this is a 2-part question. Make sure you answer both parts using complete sentences. For number 2, when did the botanist analyze the collected data? Why do you think the data was analyzed at this time? So when they're analyzing something, they're looking at it really closely and they're trying to find patterns and meaning in the information that they collected. And data is just a way of saying information. After you've done that, you can go ahead and give your best answer for our essential question. How do plant structures help them survive and reproduce? So try your best. There's no right or wrong answer right now because we're still getting familiar with this lesson. Once you've completed that, we're going to go on to our next pages. And we're going to look, starting on page 111, we're going to look at the different words and use them to help answer our questions. So our vocabulary words for this week are adaptation, photosynthesis, stomata, transpiration, respiration, cone, stimulus, response, and tropism. We've got a lot of vocabulary words this week, but all of them have really interesting meanings that we're going to look at and learn about throughout the entire lesson. Now, our first word is the word adaptation. An adaptation is any kind of trait that helps a living thing survive in its environment. So think about animals or plants, anything that they have on them that helps them to survive. So for example, you have a cactus has thorns. Those thorns help it to survive and to keep the water that it stores inside of it to keep it alive. So that way other animals don't come and eat it. That's an example of an adaptation. Next, we have the word photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is the food-making process in green plants that use sunlight. So photo means light. Here we're talking about sunlight. Synthesis is when you make something. So you're making something with light. And what we're making over here is food for the plant. Plants are organisms that are able to make their own food. They don't need to get it from a different source. Next, we have the word stomata. Stomata are pores in the bottom of the leaves that open and close to let air or to give off water vapor. So they're tiny little holes or openings in the leaves that release air or water vapor into the air around it. Transpiration is the loss of water through a plant's leaves. So anytime water is being pushed out of the plant through its leaves, that's called transpiration. Now, respiration is the using and releasing of energy in a cell. So when you use up the energy and let it out, that's called respiration. Next, we have the word cone. The cone is the reproductive structure of a conifer, such as a pine tree. So a conifer is a plant that produces kinds of cones, and the seeds are in the cones. So like a pine tree has pine cones on it. So the reproductive structure, the part where the seeds are made in order to be able to create new trees, is found in the cones. A stimulus is something in the environment that causes a living thing to respond. And a response is the reaction to that stimulus. So think of it like cause and effect. So a stimulus is something that makes a living thing respond to it. And the response is how it reacts to that stimulus. Now, tropisms are really interesting. We're going to learn about a couple different kinds of tropisms. A tropism is a plant's response to something in its environment, either how it's reacting or responding to sunlight, to water, to gravity, to being touched or stimulated by something outside of its environment. All right, let's go ahead and look at the digital interactive that's titled Roots, Stems, and Leaves. And we're going to look at the different structures and functions of plant parts and answer the questions. So you can answer them as you go, or you can watch it all the way through and then go back and fill in your answers. What are the functions of a plant's roots? What are the functions of a plant's stem? What are the functions of a plant's leaves? So use complete sentences for all of these. They gave you plenty of lines so that you're able to write a really good complete answer with lots of details.
Plants have several structures that make it possible for the plant to survive. Without leaves, stems, and roots, the plant would not be able to meet its needs. Click on each hotspot to learn more about these important structures and their functions. Root, stems, and leaves. Root. Roots take up water and nutrients from the ground. They also keep plants firmly in the soil. Some roots even store food.
When you think about roots, think about these as where your plant is soaking up its water from. So it takes the water, it collects the moisture and the nutrients out of the ground, and it delivers those up into the different plant parts.
Stem. A plant stem grows above the ground. The stem moves food, water, and nutrients throughout the plant. Stems also hold the plant upright so it does not fall over. There are two kinds of stems. Stem, woody. Most trees and shrubs have woody stems. Woody stems protect the plant and give it extra support. Stem, non-woody. Smaller plants have stems that are soft, green, and bendable. They rely on the pressure of watery sap for support.
So here we can see that the stem has a lot of different purposes. One of them is basically to hold the plant upright so the plant can stand, otherwise it would flop over. And depending on the kind of stem it has, they have a different function.
Leaf. Most plants use leaves to collect light energy from the sun. Sunlight is combined with carbon dioxide to make food for a plant in the form of sugars. This process is called photosynthesis. Leaf. Epidermis. The epidermis is a thin covering to help keep water inside the plant. It protects leaves the way skin protects your body.
So just like we have on our skin, our outer layer of skin is called our epidermis. The outside of a plant's leaves is also called the epidermis because it helps to keep the water and the moisture that the plant needs inside of the leaves to help keep the plant alive.
Leaf, vein. This is a small tube called a vein. Veins carry water from the roots to the stem. Veins also move water and sugars to each cell in the plant.
Now for the veins in a leaf, so you can see all these different things that look like bumps and lines all the way through it. Those connect all the way from the roots of your plant all the way throughout the leaves, and that's how water and nutrients are carried throughout your plant.
Respiration. The sugar that is produced during photosynthesis is broken down in the plant's cells. Energy stored in the sugar is released. This process is called respiration. During respiration, the plant cells take in oxygen and give off carbon dioxide and water. Leaf, stoma. Tiny holes on the bottom of leaves are called stomata. A single hole is called a stoma. Carbon dioxide enters the leaf through the stomata. Extra water and oxygen escapes through the stomata. This process of water vapor being released by stomata is called transpiration.
Here we're talking about these tiny little openings along the bottom of the leaf that allow moisture and oxygen to exit the leaf. And that process, again, is called transpiration.
Leaf, stoma. Magnified view of a stoma.
All right, here you can see what they look like. So you can see these tiny little openings. Now that we've gone through the different parts, go back and use complete sentences to describe the functions of a plant's roots. So what does it do? What are the purposes of it? And there's more than one, so make sure you go back and check. For number 2, what are the function of a plant's stem? Again, we have 2 different kinds of stems that we talked about, what they do, what are their main purposes, how do they help the plant? And for number 3, what are the function of a plant's leaves? And when we looked through the leaves section, we saw many different parts. So use the information that you gathered there to go ahead and answer question number 3. Next, we're going to look at page 67 to 71 in our science handbook and answer the following questions. So let's read the questions first so we know what information we're looking for. Number 4 says, use the flower diagram on page 67 of the science handbook to help you explain how parts of a flower work together to produce seeds. Number 5, what function does fruit carry out in plant reproduction? Number 6, how are conifers different from other plants? Number 7, what does a seed need in order to grow into a new plant? Let's go ahead and jump into our handbook. We're going to begin reading on page 67 all the way until 71. Plant parts. Leaves. Leaves occur in a variety of shapes and sizes. They're the site of photosynthesis, or food production, and transpiration, the release of water into the air. Transpiration drives the movement of materials throughout the plant. As water evaporates from the leaves, more water is carried from the bottom of the plant to the top. Water moves into the leaves, replacing the water that has evaporated. Here we can take a look at the different parts. The diagram shows a cross-section of a leaf. So that means a leaf when it's cut, so you can see the inside. Each of the labeled structures has an important function. So here we have the guard cells. We have the phloem, the stoma, which are the openings in the cells. We have the xylem, the veins that carry water and nutrients throughout the entire plant. The epidermis, which is the top layer that helps keep moisture inside. And then we have the cuticle. Now, the cuticle is a waxy coating that keeps water from evaporating. The epidermis contains the cells that are the main site of the food production in a plant. The vein holds the xylem and the phloem. Xylem is the tissue that transports water and dissolved nutrients throughout the plant. The stoma or stomata are the tiny holes or pores that allow gases to enter and leave the plant, and water also leaves the plant through the stomata. So when a plant uses up carbon dioxide and then it releases oxygen, those are also through the stomata. The phloem is tissue that transports sugars throughout the plant. So that's the food that's made during photosynthesis. The phloem allows it to move throughout the plant. And the guard cells control the size of the stomata to keep the plant from losing too much water. Flowers. In most seed plants, flowers are the structures used for reproduction. Most flowers contain male and female parts within the same flower. The male part is the stamen. Pollen, which contains the male sex cells, is produced in the anther. The pistil is the plant part that makes the female sex cells. The ovary stores these cells. In the process of pollination, pollen is moved into the pistil. In some plants, pollen is moved by the wind. Animals such as bees and birds move the pollen of other plants. After pollination, the pollen moves to the ovary. Fertilization occurs when the male and female cells join. Although flowers come in many colors and shapes, they all contain the structures used in these structures that are used in reproduction. So this long section is the pistil. The bottom part over here is the ovary. The stamen are the long, skinny parts that usually have the pollen on top. And the anther is the part of the stamen that has the pollen. So the top kind of fluffy looking part. Fruits. Fertilization occurs in the plant ovary, resulting in the seed. The ovary then develops into a fruit, which protects the seed. Some fruits appeal to the animals, which eat the fruits and can spread the plant seeds in their droppings. Cones. Some seed plants reproduce with cones instead of flowers. These plants, called conifers, usually produce both male and female cones. The male cones produce pollen that is released in the wind. The female cones produce a sticky liquid that captures the wind-blown pollen. Pollination and fertilization occur in the female cone. So here we looked at the parts of the flower, and here we can see that fruits develop from the ovary in a plant's flower, and down here we can see the cones on different conifer plants. Plant life cycles. Like all living things, plants have life cycles. Each stage of development a living thing goes through in its life is part of the organism's life cycle. Life cycles of 4 different kinds of plants are shown on these pages. The life cycle of a moss includes an asexual stage in which spores from a new plant. The new plant then grows and produces male and female cells, and sexual reproduction occurs. The life cycle alternates between sexual and asexual stages. So we can see over here that when we have the new plant grows into an adult plant that fertilizes, that has the sperm and the egg. The egg becomes fertilized in that plant, and then the new moss plant grows and creates spores, and those spores are basically like seeds that spread, and once they are in a good environment for them to grow, they'll grow into a new plant, and the cycle continues. The life cycle of a fern starts with asexual reproduction involving spores. The spores grow into small plants that produce male and female cells. The next step of the life cycle involves sexual reproduction. So you can see that when you have a new fern plant, it grows into the fern frond that produces spores, which are tiny, really lightweight cells or lightweight seeds that are released into the environment. And it produces this heart-shaped plant. So in the heart-shaped plant, the sperm and the egg come in contact with each other. The egg becomes fertilized and it grows into a new fern plant, and that life cycle continues. The diagram shown of the life cycle of a flowering plant. The seeds are encased in the fruit. The seeds germinate or begin to grow. If conditions are right, a seedling then grows into a plant and produces flowers. The asexual portion of the flowering plant life cycle is not shown in this diagram. So once you have your seedling, it grows into an adult plant. The adult plant develops a stamen where it has the pollen. We have our pollinator, in this case, that's the bee. It'll bring pollen from another plant into the pistil and then down into the ovary of the flower. And then the seeds will develop with fruit around them to protect them and keep them safe. And then once those seeds are released or dropped into the ground, they will grow into a new plant, a seedling, and then into an adult plant. The life cycle of conifers and flowering plants are very similar. Remember that conifers produce seeds in their cones rather than in the flowers. So that portion of the conifer life cycle is not shown over here. When we have our adult plant, we have the male cones and we have the female cones. And the male cones release pollen and the female cones have a sticky substance so that that pollen sticks to it and produces the pine seeds. And once those pine seeds are again dropped into the ground, grows into a seedling and then into an adult plant, and the cycle continues. Plant life cycles, growing from seeds. Inside the ovary of a flower, the fused sperm cells and egg cells develop into an embryo. An embryo is the beginning of new offspring. As it grows, the embryo is packed inside of a seed. The seed develops. The ovary enlarges until it becomes a fruit. The fruit protects the seeds inside. The seed has three main parts. The embryo is the offspring that can grow into a new plant. Surrounding the embryo is its food supply, or cotyledon. The growing embryo lives off the food supply until it's big enough to make food on its own. The seed is surrounded by a tough protective covering called the seed coat. Once formed, seeds must fall into a favorable location in order to germinate. Germination is the development of a seed into a new plant. Seeds will not sprout unless conditions are right. Favorable conditions include enough water and space to grow. Seeds do not need sunlight to germinate, but growing seedlings need sunlight to produce food after the cotyledons are used up. A seedling is a young plant that grows from a seed. Seedlings need water, light, and nutrients to grow. If the needs are met, the seedling will grow into an adult plant. The adult plant will then produce seeds and the life cycle continues. How seeds spread. Animals. Animals disperse seeds in many ways. Some seeds, like the ones shown here, have hooks that catch onto the fur of passing animals. The seeds drop as the animal walks away. Seeds that develop in fleshy fruits are eaten by animals and dispersed in their droppings. Other seeds, such as acorns, are buried by animals preparing for winter. Forgotten seeds can grow into new plants. Explosions. The Himalayan balsam flower forcefully ejects their seed when the seed pods are touched. Wind. Have you ever blown the fluff on a dandelion? If you have, you were helping spread its seeds. Other plants that use the wind to spread their seeds include maple trees and milkweed, shown here. Water. Many coconut palms use nearby water sources to disperse their seeds. All right, go ahead and head back into your workbook. And you can go ahead and answer the questions. Explain how the parts of a flower work together to produce the seeds. What function does fruit carry out in plant reproduction? How are conifers different from other plants? And what do seeds need in order to grow into a new plant? So all of those were in the pages that we just finished reading. Feel free to go back and rewind if you like. Next, we're going to look at page 46 in our handbook and answer the questions after we finished our reading. We're going to give an example of a stimulus and a reaction that you experienced recently. And then we're going to fill in our data table about the different types of tropisms that we're going to learn about: phototropism, gravitropism, hydrotropism, and thigmotropism. Now, on page 46, we're going to read about plant behavior. Plants cannot move around as animals can, yet plants also react to changes in their environment. Plants respond to stimuli such as sunlight, water, or gravity. A plant responds to a stimulus by changing its pattern of growth. This response is known as a tropism. The word tropism comes from the Greek word tropos, which means a turning. Phototropism. Plants respond to light by growing towards the light source. In this photo, sunlight is the stimulus. In response, the plant produces a chemical that causes cells on different sides of its trunk to grow at different rates. The plant bends towards the light. This response is known as phototropism. The word part photo means light. So if you look at the picture, you can see that the plant is leaning towards the window where the light is coming through. It's not growing straight up anymore. It's leaning towards the right. Gravitropism. Most plant roots grow downwards, the same direction as the pull of gravity. Like the water lilies shown here, the stems of most plants grow upward, away from the pull of gravity. This response is known as gravitropism. The word part gravi means the force that gives weight to objects, also known as gravity. Hydrotropism. Roots sense water in the soil and grow towards it. This response is known as hydrotropism. The word part hydro means water. These roots are showing both hydrotropism by searching for water and gravitropism by searching for soil. So you can see the roots over here are growing downwards and fanning out to find water sources. Now, thigmotropism is actually a thing that a lot of you guys have seen and probably didn't notice. Some plants respond to touch or contact with an object by curling around that object or clinging to it. This response is known as thigmotropism. The word part thigmo means touch. So anytime you've walked by a wall or a pillar on a building and you've seen plants kind of climbing up the side, that's thigmotropism. So you're going to use the information that you just gathered, write an example of a stimulus and reaction that you've experienced, and then fill in the 4 different kinds of tropisms that we talked about. Use details from your reading to fill it in correctly. Are plants better off with tropisms or without them? Use evidence from what you learned to construct your argument. So think about everything you learned about tropisms and why they exist and why plants have those different abilities. And think, is that beneficial to the plant? Does it help it? Yes or no? And how or why? Make sure you use complete sentences and details. You have plenty of lines to fill in a complete answer. Once you're done with that, you are going to work on designing your own experiment. Now, you're not required to carry out this experiment, but just to set it up and design it so that you can answer the question that you're looking for. So in this activity, you're going to design an experiment to test how a plant would react to a water source. So develop a hypothesis that you want to answer in this experiment. So you can say, if this happens, then this is going to happen. That can be your hypothesis. That's your guess about what's going to happen in your experiment. Now, use your science notebook to think about different ways that you can test this hypothesis. Pick one of your ideas and use complete sentences to write down the list of materials that you would need for your experiment on the lines under number 1. For number 2, you're going to write down the steps of how you're going to carry out this experiment. Remember to include all of the materials that you need and how you're going to use them. For number 3, would your experiment allow you to construct an argument with evidence? So is what you're doing, can you defend it with evidence? Is it going to show your response? Are you going to be able to support your hypothesis? Now, we know that plants respond to stimuli in their environment. Those are the tropisms. Did you know that you can use math to help understand some of these responses? Plants respond to sunlight by growing towards it. This causes the plant stem to form an angle with the ground. An angle is formed by 2 lines that meet at a common endpoint. The stem meets the ground at this endpoint. There are 3 main types of angles. A right angle has a square corner where the lines meet. An obtuse angle has a wider opening than a right angle, and an acute angle has a smaller opening than a right angle. So if you look at the bottom of your page right here, That's a right angle, where the corner where the edges of your paper meet, straight up and down and straight across. That's a right angle. An obtuse angle would be open greater than that, and an acute angle would be open less than that. So which one of these show an acute angle that's open less than 90 degrees or less than a right angle? Remember, a right angle would be straight up and down and straight across. So one of these is an acute angle that shows it's closed more than a 90-degree angle or more than a right angle. Color the sky of the diagram that shows an obtuse angle. So you're going to circle one of them, and then you're going to color the sky above the other one. Do either of the plants have right angles? How do you know? So you can go back and read this section to review what those different angles are. Remember, a right angle has a square corner. So if you look at a square, those corners meet and make right angles. So do either one of these look like right angles to you or like square corners to you? Yes or no, and explain how you know. Once you're done with that, please make sure you go back and review all of the lesson content, all of the vocabulary words. We did have several of them for this lesson, and get ready for your quiz. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a great day, fourth grade. Take care. Bye-bye.